I've been thinking about decision making and how,
Timely. Go ahead. I'm having trouble with decision making, but go ahead.
um, yeah, I noticed that sometimes I make decisions based on a whim, and sometimes it's based on what I think is a reasoned approach. Sometimes I rely on authority, um, and it's uh, uh, it's fine if I'm making decisions for myself, what breakfast to have and what uh, that sort of thing, what to wear, that sort of thing. It's pretty mundane. But when the stakes are higher and when um, a decision is made in a relationship setting or in a group setting where there are several competing uh, such processes going on, coming up with a decision, I'm uh, it, it seems to me that trying to practice presence uh, in arriving at a decision, it seems like too much of uh, luxury, so to speak, because it takes time and there is no guarantee that the the resulting solution would be agreeable to all parties. Uh, and it's not even a perfect technique in the sense that if I can make an attempt at staying present in the process of arriving at a decision, but there is no guarantee that I cannot uh, assure that I'll be present. So it seems to me that I give up very easily um, in such scenarios, and by giving up I mean I resign to the practicing presence in such a situation is it's too much of an effort with no guaranteed outcome. So why even bother? Let's just get done with this, and then uh, I can worry about the next time a decision needs to be made.
Worry about practicing presence again.
Yeah, I mean I know it's I fully realize that it's not sustainable or practical, but I feel stuck there, and I'm not sure how to get out of that rut.
So decisions can be a hard thing in the context of presence practice, and I want to speak humbly about it because it's a challenge for me as well. But I would describe it a little differently than you did. Um, you kind of gave a kind of rational explanation for why it might not be so useful, but I didn't find that very convincing. So maybe we can refine that a little bit. You said there's no, it affects other people. If the decision is important, I think, and it's not clear from and easy to make from just rational thinking, it seems like it's important to try to get to something deeper than that, to a heart place. And to access that, being present is helpful. So if you're present more around the decision, I think the chances of it being a wise decision increase, and that's good for you, and it's also good for other people. So whether other people are involved or not doesn't seem to affect that. You want to make the best decisions, and if it's clear that you need some information and regular rational thinking to figure out the decision, then that's fine. If you seem to be, have a difficult decision, like it seems to have balanced out, you've already accumulated information and you just need to make it. And I find that difficult sometimes. Then seems better to enter presence, let go of any anxiety around it, let go of thinking about yourself as the blameworthy or praiseworthy person, which is a non-presence kind of thing, when you hold the person and evaluate their value. And that makes our decisions harder because we want to be the person who makes the right decision. So if you're able to let go of that, it's not always easy, but if you're able to let go of that and just kind of feel and let go of the decision first, just enter presence, and then from there try to let a decision come. That seems like the wisest course of action. Now, that might not be easy to do. It's sometimes not easy for me, but I don't see a rational reason to say I shouldn't use presence. If you can, I think it seems to me that it would help. Strictly speaking, when you make a decision, you can't really be present. Or fully present. I mean, there's ways that you can feel presence while entering into dualistic thought. But the actual choice is at least to some degree going into dualistic thinking for a second. I'll do that. Maybe more than a second, but if it's nice, just not for that long. But to recognize that the choice just comes can be very helpful. So I was listening to talk the other day, and we've talked about this before, actually, some of these science experiments where the signal for a decision is made before the person is rationally aware that they're deciding. So the signal to move your arm to get a drink is made before you're aware that you're deciding you want that drink. When they study brainwaves and stuff, I don't know the details about it, but so that's even more evidence, if it's hard to understand, that if we're looking through time, cause and effect just happen, and there's no person there that's making a decision. Body, mind, energy, or what we call body, mind, energy, is happening. And the universe is picking a decision. And there's no person that's in control anyway. This is a very important insight that eases decisions. But it comes and goes. So sometimes you can feel that. Sometimes you don't feel it as much, and then the decision is harder. We have long habits of thinking a lot about ourselves as the subject that makes decisions and is responsible personally for praise or blame. That's pretty deeply rooted. So to recognize that and work on letting it go is a good direction until you realize you're allowed to surrender. You're allowed to not try to be in control. You're allowed to recognize you're not really in control and just surrender to the moment, what's happening. The problem is with presence practice and decisions is, if you're having a hard time with the decision, you can practice presence and let go. I do that, for example, and I feel relief and I feel joy to some extent. The decision might still be in the back of your head a little bit, but it doesn't help you make the decision, really, because being present and letting go of thought, the decision remains unmade, right? At some point, you've got to use a little thought and just make the decision. And some people, myself included, sometimes get caught in that. As soon as we go back to decision, there's a cycle of thinking that's deeply worn, and you can go back into that. But I think practicing presence as much as you can around the decision, and at the time when you don't actually have to make that decision, And letting go of excess thinking about it when you're not making the decision is very important. And maybe you have to practice patience for a while until a decision comes, unless there's a real clear time limit. But you practice patience for a while, just not dwelling on the decision and just seeing what the body-mind comes up with, knowing that you're not really in control. I think that's a healthy thing. When I've been able to do that, it feels healthy. You can't always do that. So, and then at the time of the decision, trusting whatever feels the most natural and the most healthy in that moment, and just letting it happen, knowing that it's okay. Either way, it's okay. Sometimes there isn't really a clear one way or the other, and that's difficult. The more alternative you are, the more that becomes difficult, right? The more alternative you are in your outlook compared to conventional society, the less you trust going along with the convention. And yet there's still a sense of ease going along with the convention because we want to belong and we want to share experience with other people and with community. And so it feels good when we're doing the decision that most people agree with or most people want. And yet at the same time, just because of being social beings and wanting to reach out and wanting to include and feeling less of the weight, like this is my responsibility, and more like this is shared and it's something bigger than me. Right. That's a beautiful feeling. And at the same time, if we're very skeptical of the wisdom of society, and there's a lot of reason to be skeptical, right? And we recognize that a lot of the conventional things people do are actually very unhealthy, then we're in a bit of a bind. We want to include other people, and yet we don't trust them, right? So that is difficult. And it helps to try to form little mini societies of people who we do trust more. But those of us who are very iconoclastic and we don't have a lot of people we trust about conventional decisions in the world, right? So that's difficult. It's even hard to find like spiritual advisors or mentors that we respect. But I find that even though most people who put themselves out as spiritual teachers, I'm very critical of, right? It's just how I am. But I can find more that I really trust their spiritual insight, as rare as that might be, than I can people who I trust their ethical vision of how to be in the world. That's really rare. I'm pretty extreme, but yeah. So that's tricky. It's part of our karma in this time and place. We're in a transition of our culture, and I was just happened to be. I don't do this very often because I already know about climate change pretty good. But I was just watching some climate change videos the other day, and it's pretty dramatic what a lot of scientists are saying now. And then you look around society and it's just totally being ignored, pretty much, or when it's talked about in unrealistic terms. So, it's like this mass denial, mass sleep going on. And when you're aware of that, it's difficult to know what to do because it's not so comfortable to be on your own. So best as we can, it's good to have a Sangha, a circle of people we can trust a little more of some of those decisions. But, rationally speaking, there's not much reason to go along with the status quo. For a lot of decisions, it's not so helpful. I think for emotional, interpersonal things, the status quo has a little more wisdom. You know what I mean? I think if you ask several people from any background about some interpersonal thing you're happening. People, even if they don't see their own issues about interpersonal stuff, they can kind of see who's being extreme or who's not listening to who, and that's a little easier for people to tell. So those decisions, I think we can use a wider circle of people's advice. But ethical practices in our lifestyle is hard because most people live a lifestyle that's comes from our advertising conditioning and an unwholesome, unhealthy culture. But non-dual practice can help us not take it too heavily, in the sense that, yes, there's unwholesome things in a relativistic point of view, but in the deepest perspective, it's all nature. It's all nature. Everything happening is simply awareness happening, and it had to be that way. That is an important point to touch, to really feel like it's okay in the deepest place. It's okay. And that can relieve some of the stress.
I was going to say non-dual practice also muddles the water a little bit by saying that what you think is right is not really right.
That doesn't muddy the water. Non-dual practice never muddies the water. So mud is, if you see it this way, which I think is the clearest way, the mud is thinking. It's always thinking. Confusion and muddied water, in terms of a metaphor for perception or for apprehension, I don't know where your word is right, but that mud is excess thinking and attachment to ideas and attachment to self. So presence practice, at least the essence of it, the direction of it, is letting go of all that. There's no mud then. So just to realize that all your thinking is not correct is not muddying things. It's releasing attachment. When we release attachment to thinking, we have a sense of freedom. Then if we have to do some thinking, we can do it from a clearer place. You don't need to be attached to thinking to make it effective. In fact, it makes it less effective. The more rigid and stressed we are about a belief, the more harmful that belief is. If we're not stressed about it, if we're not rigid, if we let go, it doesn't mean we can't make the decision. It just means we can make the decision with less stress, and it's likely to come from a heart place more easily. It's likely to be less warped. That's the way I would say it. But if that doesn't seem clear, then you should, I didn't mean to cut you off, you should still articulate what you, how it feels.
Elaborate on that a little bit. I tend to think of these, the way decisions are made in a sort of hierarchy of, one is, oh, I dreamed about it, so I'm going to do it. You don't, or there's not much backing it, or I just feel like it. I just feel like doing this, so I'm going to do it. This is, I have thoroughly looked at all the things I could possibly can, and this is what I feel. This is the best I could come up with. And relying on authority is somewhere in between, where I realize I'm not equipped to decide, and so I relied on authority and came up with this as the right thing. Right. So it seems like there is some hierarchy of how you can make a decision, and relying on non-dual practice seems to say that all these are bunk. Don't. It's all these are thinking, various forms of thinking.
Yeah.
In fact, ironically, the one where you whimsically choose one involves the least thinking. But conventionally, that seems like the least thoughtful thing to do.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't keep that hierarchy in mind. The non-dual perspective, I think, does suggest that the intuition, spontaneously made decision might be the best in a hierarchy, but ultimately that's not right either. There's no hierarchy. you just respond the most appropriate way. And as with most things, the amount that it causes suffering is the amount that it's advisable. I mean, the inverse proportions. The more suffering is, the less it's advisable to follow that method, if you're able. I mean, so if there's a decision where it makes sense to accumulate information, and it seems important enough to accumulate information, then it's fine to accumulate information, as long as you can do it fairly without much suffering, right? Maybe it's interesting, you're curious, you actually want to accumulate the information. So then there's no problem. You accumulate the information. If somehow that it's a tedious and anxiety-causing process to accumulate the information, it might not be a healthy thing to do. It might not be necessary. You know? In any case, the extent that it's causing suffering, you should pay attention to. And if it really does, maybe you're accumulating too much information. You know? And then once you accumulate a reasonable amount of information that you were curious about and seemed reasonable, then you either make the decision. If then you can't make the decision, maybe you get some advice from other people, especially if that feels comfortable. If that also, then you still can't make the decision, then it might be time to rely on that intuition or just feeling or just that heart place and let go of thinking, you know? Because too much just gets into a cycle, you know? And I think we've all had taste of that. I certainly have. So it's just what's appropriate to the time. But the non-dual perspective will allow us to, all it really does is reduce the stress if we can touch that place, right? Because we know that it's okay. It's okay either way. I do the best I can and then I let go, because there really isn't a me that's blameworthy or praiseworthy. That's just a repeating thought. But the universe is really doing it, so it's okay. You know? That perspective might not make it, you know, it obviously doesn't, in my experience, always make it easy. You can't tap into it all the time either. You know? Our mind just has to go through its karma sometimes. But I think that's the direction to go. At least we shouldn't have a belief that somehow non-dual practice is getting in the way and we have to put that aside. Basically, then what we're saying is our thinking mind is really correct, and non-dual practice is this thing that's getting in the way of our thinking mind. And that is a conventional point of view. But it's something, if you're doing non-dual practice, is something to consider what you believe, how much you believe that.
One thing I was thinking was, like, you know, if it's a repeated thing with the same person, like in a relationship, just kind of trying to do different things. Like, even if just kind of, like, just how you were saying about, you know, your decision might be a failure. I just, at this point, I don't think there's really a decision that can be a failure, even if it's just sometimes I thought I'd made really bad decisions and then it turns out really great. Like, I don't know if that makes any sense. But,
yeah.
But like, because of that understanding, it's like, you know, if you feel just stuck with a person, like you're always butting heads, just, you know, just sometimes maybe try something like unvolatile. Like, almost like not unethical, but just, you know, come at it from different angles, and that might, you know, free things up a little bit.
Yeah, you tried that and good. Yeah, just getting out of your usual patterns and trying something new and seeing what it does. Yeah. Everyone's manifesting differently. And it's part of that ego function to always compare ourselves to others and try to kind of want to match up. What we really want is just to belong. But belonging doesn't mean you're doing the same thing as somebody else. You know? Belonging means you just put down your separation and you're just allowing experience to be experience, which has no boundaries. But it doesn't mean you have to conform your behavior to follow somebody else's behavior. It's like this tree and this bush belong together completely. They have no separation, but the tree is like the tree, and the bush is like the bush, and the flower is like the flower. So I really like this. There was this Rupert Spira dialogue, and the guy was asking about choice and where choice comes from and how to make a choice, and the way he asked is it okay to just surrender? And when they went through the process and realized that we really are not in control of our choices, they just happen, then there can be that light that opens up that says it's okay to surrender, which means not trying to control it, to just be totally receiving of what's coming up as your apparent body mind, as the experiences that you're experiencing, knowing that it's the whole universe. There's no one there responsible, and there's no one there in control. It's a repeating thought that comes up and goes, that there's someone like that. But when you look, there's nothing there. There's just experience happening. And to surrender means you still need to make decisions, but you can let go of that solid person, that sense of duty and shame and guilt and hope around your decisions, and just receive it as something happening, as something unfolding. Yeah. I thought it was a beautiful way to think about it. Just surrender.
This is something that keeps coming up again and again. Maybe I'm missing something.
Mm-hmm.
Surrender means you are not putting up a resistance. And if you're not
Mm-hmm.
putting up a resistance in the face of an overwhelming force from the society, you would just tend to go along with it, right? So I'm missing the point about belonging without conforming.
I would say surrender as I mean it is letting go of that anxiety causing attachment and holding to the sense of control, or the sense that there's a person there that's responsible, separate from just the experience happening, cut off from the rest of the universe, solely responsible, individually, personally responsible. That's a weight. That's a weight and an anxiety. And to let go of that is the surrender I'm talking about. And just find yourself as experience flowing. Now, being right in that state fully, you don't make a decision. It's true, but being informed by that experience, you can try to make a decision. I mean, when you make a decision, there's at least a subtle rejection, right? There's a selection of one and at least a subtle rejection of another. But the lighter we can make that, the easier it can be. You make it, because you're just asked, either by a person or by the universe, to make some decision, and you just make a decision, but you recognize that the universe is really making it, and you don't add the added weight of I'm so responsible and guilt and shame and blame and right and wrong being so rigidly fixed, like there really is a right and there really is a wrong. Instead, you can say, well, there seems to be a right and wrong here a little bit, and I'll go for the right, but it's not really fixed. and either one is okay. What actually happens is what's actually right. And what's wrong actually never happens, so you don't have to worry about it. You know? So the fact that we can't see that, we have to make a decision, because we don't know which one's going to happen. So we participate, but we can trust that it's the whole universe and not me, myself, not my separate self so much. So that's what I mean by surrender. It doesn't have so much to do with what the rest of the world is doing.
Right. Okay. That's helpful.
Yeah. You can make an easy decision that's different from what everyone else is doing, or an easy decision that's the same as everyone. It's kind of irrelevant.
It's just being comfortable with the consequences of your decision.
Accepting completely. Yeah. And also knowing that you don't know the consequences. I mean, I would say you're going to accept completely the continued experience of life after the decision is made, but you don't really know the consequences. That's a figuring thing. That's a thinking thing. You know, it's far beyond your thinking, the real consequences. It always will be. So that helps you to surrender.
And also with
Yeah.
that, I think maybe what I'm trying to say, it's like you kind of believe the universe is like working for love. Like, it's just there can't be a wrong.
Right. We want to be careful, though. If we say the universe is working for love, it personifies it a bit, and also implies to a lot of people, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with what I think you're saying, but it's not that it's going to go in a certain way that we think love should go, devoid of suffering or difficulty, but that the experience of existence itself, when we don't have a self, includes everything, and in that inclusivity and timelessness, there is beauty or love as its essence. We can use those words anyway. It's beyond the thinking. And we have to trust that wholeness beyond our thinking. That's what our practice really is, moving from using our thinking as the arbiter to realizing there's something deeper that's the real arbiter. The problem is we can't dispense completely with our thinking, right? So we have to go into that realm a little bit, into that mud. And sometimes it's difficult. But that's just all part of the process. It's part of the artwork. It's part of the beauty that is this existence, is that it has dark, challenging times too. It's part of what makes the whole have its beautiful fullness.
I was wondering if indecision is only unpleasant when there's fear involved.
Yeah, it depends how you mean the word indecision. I mean, a state of indecision to me seems to imply anxiety, and I agree with you. It's because there's some fear in it. But the fact that you just haven't made a decision, and you let go of making a decision until the time when you need to, yeah, that can be totally fine. That's what you mean. Or just not committing to one way or the other, and just feeling the letting go of that. That could be fine.
I mean that it's just a process of indecision. It's not like you haven't come to a decision. Keep going from one side to the other, but it's not painful because there's not fear involved. I mean, the indecision can even, for people who say, well, it's understandable because it's pretty awful if that doesn't happen and that doesn't happen, but people can have painful indecision over what holiday to go on. That's about what holiday to go on. That's something really pleasant.
Yeah.
They've got all this fear of missing out.
Right.
Right. Of indecision.
I would just say, if you are feeling the feeling, what we might call the feeling of indecision, it seems to me that it's a state of anxiety, that there is fear there. So I'm not sure what you mean by being in indecision without feeling fear. I mean, you might experience thinking, I think I might go this way, but you don't make the decision yet because you don't need to. And then that drops away. And then you might think, maybe I'll go this way. But you don't need to make the decision, so that drops away. And yeah, that I can see could be fine.
No, but don't you think indecision can be exciting? I was thinking, why is it so painful?
Maybe,
and that's because it's the fears that come up. If I don't do this,
I agree. To me, it seems like if you look at it carefully, any extended period, let's say, of indecision will have fear in it. That doesn't mean an extended period where you're not making a decision will have fear in it. But an extended period where you're actually in a feeling of indecision seems to imply anxiety or fear to me. I mean, if someone says, which of these two things do you want? And you're looking and you feel some excitement, I think it's from the fact that someone came up to you and said, which things do you want? It's kind of a fun situation for a second. But if it took you an hour to think about it, I don't think it'd be fun. If just for a couple seconds you're just impressed by the appearance of this decision, that's fine, yeah. And then you pick one and that's all fine. But if you stay in that place where you're going back and forth, it means you're losing being aware of the sun and the air and the breathing and your body and all the richness of being alive, because you start to focus on this one thing. And I think the only reason we would stay in the decision is because we feel the weight of fear of one decision being right and one being wrong and what's the consequences. It might be subtle, it might not feel very heavy, but at least a little bit I think it's unpleasant if you stay in that indecision. So I'm not exactly sure the mode that you're talking about.
Well, I mean, I just think people that are doing scientific calculations, and they might decide, I'm still not sure, I'm going to do another bunch of scientific calculations.
Right.
And
I wouldn't
people-
say they're staying in indecision then. They're doing calculations because they like to, because they're curious and they're accumulating more information. They don't feel the need to make a decision yet, so they're doing some other activity. Yeah, I think that
but
seems
that's what
fine.
we're doing in our head, we're doing calculations, but we keep doing the same calculation.
Yeah, I mean, when we do it too much, we start to exclude the rest of life. And that's usually led by fear, seems to me. I mean, accumulating information or being curious and pursuing something, that's, even if it will later lead to a decision that you haven't made yet, that doesn't seem to be a state of indecision to me. But to feel those choices and not be able to make one seems to imply some level of fear of anxiety.
It's interesting to me that it's the fear of doing wrong rather than the excitement of doing right. Or it's really dwelling on, like, there's one choice that's better than the other, but instead of being excited about making the better choice, we're fearful about making the wrong choice.
Yeah.
And that's why it's really uncomfortable, because we're not on the excited about making that choice.
Yeah, although I think that's true for a lot of decisions. Certainly my decisions seem to be more like that. But I think some people might feel it. There's two decent choices. There are two good choices, but one is better than the other. One will lead to more joy, like the holiday thing you're saying. And they don't want to lose out on the better one. They really want to maximize their betterness.
Yeah, so they're focusing on not having as much better, they're fearing
having the less better one. Yeah.
Instead of being excited about having the more better, they're fearing having less better.
Well, they're trying to find the more better.
Right.
And the anxiety is around that, finding which one is the more better. And again, our presence practice helps us with these decisions, because the idea that the best vacation, the best conditions, we need to seek out the best conditions to be happy. We should be critically examining that and seeing the illusion of that. That our real happiness is not dependent on conditions. It's not dependent on the vacation spot. It's not dependent on the quality of the hotel. It's not dependent on any of that. It's simply dependent on if we're enjoying presence of life, which can be done anywhere. We don't have to go anywhere. You know? And what actually unfolds is never like what you're going to think it's going to be. So setting up a trip in the future to bring certain joy. And maybe we don't go on these kind of vacations as much. Think about going to a resort or something. But I know this from my experience of loving going to the woods and backpacking. I can get really very occupied with the best route, the best mountain, the best group to go with, all of these things. And it doesn't necessarily turn out that way. And really, it depends what your mind is like at that time, whether you're appreciating the view or whatever. So that's what that surrender is, really letting go of thinking you're going to control it. You're not. Joy resides in what happens when you surrender to this present moment. Just let it be what it is. Stop trying to control. Then the anxiety dissipates and you realize, I am this love. I am this wholeness. It's always happening. I'm just divorced from it. I'm just kept from it when I'm in my mind, in my thinking. So that's what needs to happen, not picking the best holiday or even the best companion, whether for an outing or for your life or whatever. We do the best we can, but that's not where success lies. Success lies in, and freedom lies in this life as it's happening, accepting it and appreciating it.